He never thought his friend's sister would look at him that way, with eyes that saw too much and said even more. What started as harmless visits turned into something neither of them could explain, a slow-burning connection caught between guilt, longing, and the kind of silence that says everything words can't. She was older, careful, afraid to fall again. He was younger, reckless, and couldn't stay away. One night, she whispered, "Don't pretend you don't want me here." And he finally told the truth. "I stopped pretending a long time ago. What happens next changes them forever. I didn't mean to stay that late." The lights in the living room had dimmed into a soft amber, the kind that makes silence sound louder. She was sitting by the window, one leg tucked under her, reading something she'd long stopped pretending to care about. Her name was Elena, my friend's older sister, though calling her that felt too small for what she was. There was something about her stillness that made you lean closer, even when she said nothing. I don't remember what we were talking about before it happened. Something harmless, a movie maybe. I only remember her voice, low, warm, with that trace of exhaustion people get from pretending they're fine. "Do you always look at people that way?" she asked, without looking up. I blinked. "What way?" She turned a page she hadn't read, her lips curving. "Like you're trying to figure out if they'll hurt you or save you." The space between us shifted. My mouth went dry. She didn't long at me. I wanted to say something clever, something that would keep the moment alive, but all I managed was, "Depends on the person." She set the book down, folding it closed with a quiet thud. "And which one am I?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes weren't. I could feel my pulse in my hands, that faint, ridiculous tremor you can't hide no matter how casual you try to seem. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, something woody and clean, like rain that forgot to fall. I tried to laugh. "You really want me to answer that?" She tilted her head, studying me in that unhurried way that older people do when they already know what you'll say. "You think too much," she murmured. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not enough." For a moment neither of us moved. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Somewhere outside, a car passed, headlights briefly sliding across her face, catching the line of her cheek, the corner of her mouth. And then she said it, softly, but with a certainty that left no room for misinterpretation. "Don't pretend you don't want me here." The words landed like a touch, quiet, deliberate, unavoidable. I felt something inside me shift, not surprise exactly, but recognition. Like she had said out loud what both of us had been circling around for weeks. I swallowed, trying to find air. My voice came out lower than I expected. "I stopped pretending a long time ago." She didn't move closer, not yet, but she didn't look away either. Her breathing changed, slower, heavier, like she was trying to steady herself. The distance between us, a few steps at most, suddenly felt impossible to cross and impossible to keep. For a second, her hand brushed the edge of the table, fingers curling against the wood. A small, trembling motion that gave away everything she was trying to hold back. Then, from down the hallway, a door creaked open, her brother's voice calling her name. She turned her head slightly, but her eyes stayed on mine, caught between hesitation and something she wasn't ready to name. "Later," she whispered, not a promise, not a refusal. Just that single word. The clock ticked again. The door closed. And in that silence, I realized how far I'd already fallen. The next morning, I told myself not to think about it. But by the time I walked into their house again, pretending I'd just come by to grab my friend for coffee, Elena was already there, barefoot in the kitchen, her hair tied loose, sunlight catching the fine strands near her cheek. She turned when she heard me. "You're early," she said, smiling just enough to make it worse. Her brother wasn't home. He'd left for work, apparently. She mentioned it casually, like it didn't mean anything, but her eyes gave her away. I leaned against the counter, trying to sound relaxed. "Guess I misread the time." "You do that often?" she asked, rinsing a glass. The water ran steady, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing skin that looked too soft for the life she'd lived. I wanted to say something about the line of her wrist, the quiet grace in her movements, but I kept still. I used to, I finally said. Not anymore. Good. She looked at me, a longer look this time. You learn fast. Something in her tone carried history. I wondered what had taught her that lesson, what had made her careful. I'd heard things from my friend before, how she'd been through a long marriage that ended quietly, like a curtain falling mid-scene. No yelling, no scandal, just two people deciding they'd stop seeing each other years before they said it aloud. She didn't talk about it, but you could feel the aftertaste of it in her silences, the way she measured her words, as if afraid of saying too much. You ever miss it? I asked without thinking. She paused, turning off the tap. Miss what? Having someone. Her back stayed to me for a moment too long. Then she sighed. Sometimes. Then I remember what it cost. Her voice trembled slightly, not weakness, just truth. I wanted to step closer, to tell her she didn't have to carry that tone of regret. When I took a breath, she turned, facing me again, and all my good intentions dissolved. She walked past me to grab a towel, brushing my shoulder, barely, but enough to send a quiet shock through me. Her perfume lingered. My pulse quickened before I could control it. She noticed. Of course she did. You shouldn't look at me like that, she said softly, her hand still near my arm. I'm not, I lied. Her lips curved, not in amusement, but understanding. You are. The air between us felt fragile, like glass ready to break if either of us moved too fast. Then tell me to stop, I said quietly. She didn't. Instead, her fingers grazed my sleeve, the smallest touch, but deliberate, slow. It lasted barely a second before she pulled away, but the space she left behind felt charged. Neither of us spoke after that. Only her breath lingered close enough for me to feel it, a quiet, invisible bridge between want and restraint. And somehow, that silence said more than anything either of us could afford to admit. It started raining that evening, a slow, steady sound against the window that made everything else quieter. My friend had gone upstairs to grab something, leaving me alone in the living room again. Elena was there too, sorting through old papers on the coffee table, pretending she didn't notice how still I'd become. Her hair was damp from the rain, clinging slightly at her temples. She brushed it back, her fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. Can you pass me that folder? She asked. I did. But when she reached for it, our hands met halfway. Neither of us moved. The folder slid, forgotten, between us. For a second, maybe less, the world felt smaller. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the patter of rain, all of it faded into one held breath. Then footsteps sounded upstairs, faint but real. We froze. She looked toward the stairs, then back at me. The air changed, sharper now, electric. Don't, she whispered. I'm not doing anything, I said, though my hand was still there, still brushing hers. Her lips parted, a tiny, silent exhale that made the moment unbearable. We stepped apart just as my friend came down, talking about some text he'd gotten. Elena straightened a stack of papers like her life depended on it. I muttered something about the rain. Neither of us looked at the other. When he left the room again, the silence returned, heavier this time. She leaned against the wall, her shoulders tense. You need to stop coming here so often, she said quietly. Do you want me to stop? She hesitated, that pause that always gave her away. It's not about what I want. That should have ended it. But instead, I stepped closer, not enough to touch, just enough for her breath to reach me. You keep saying that, I murmured. But you don't move away. Her eyes flickered to my lips before she caught herself. You don't understand. I think I do. Another silence, deeper, slower. The kind that stretches until it becomes a confession. Her hand lifted, almost like she meant to touch my face, then stopped midway. The space between her fingers and my skin was maybe an inch, maybe less, but it burned all the same. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The smell of rain drifted through the open window, clean, heavy, full of something about to break. I could have leaned in. I almost did. But she blinked, a sharp, trembling motion, and stepped back before it could happen. "This isn't supposed to happen," she said, voice shaking slightly. "You're too young, and I—" She didn't finish. Neither of us did. Because then her phone buzzed on the table, a message lighting up the screen, her brother's name glowing across it. We both looked at it, then at each other. And somehow, in that stolen glance, closer than we'd ever dared, the line we were trying not to cross became impossibly thin. It had been days since that storm, but the tension never left. Every time I came over, it felt like we were pretending to live inside the same silence, her avoiding my eyes, me pretending not to notice when she did. Tonight was different. Her brother had gone out, leaving us in a house too quiet for pretending. Elena was in the living room, leaning against the window, light from the street spilling across her face. She didn't turn when I entered. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," I replied, closing the door behind me. "But you didn't tell me not to come." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You twist words like you know what they'll cost." "Maybe I do." The way she looked at me then, half exasperation, half surrender, was something I'll never forget. I walked closer, slow enough to give her a chance to move. She didn't. "Elena," I said, her name rough in my throat. She turned finally, eyes tired, lips parted. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly," I said. "You keep telling yourself it's wrong because it makes it easier not to feel it." She tried to speak, but the words caught. Her jaw tightened. "You think this is easy for me?" "That I don't." She stopped, exhaling hard. "You're just a boy who doesn't know what happens after." I stepped forward, close enough that I could feel the warmth from her skin. "Then tell me what happens after." Her breath hitched, a tiny sound, almost a gasp. "You'll regret it." "Then let me." Her hand trembled, still clutching the edge of the window frame. I reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't move away, just closed her eyes for half a second too long. "Stop," she whispered, though her voice had lost its certainty. "I can't," I said. "Not when you look at me like that." Her eyes opened, wide and unguarded. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because they're true?" The air felt heavy, alive. She leaned back slightly, but I followed close enough that I could smell her perfume, faint and steady, like warmth and rain. She looked up at me, her lips trembling. "This isn't fair. Neither is wanting something you're not allowed to have." The silence stretched again, full of everything we hadn't said, everything we were about to. Her hand came up, resting against my chest, not pushing me away, not pulling me closer, just there. I covered her hand with mine, fingers curling around hers. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then she whispered, "If you say another word, I'll—" But she never finished. Because at that exact moment, headlights swept across the window, a car pulling into the driveway. Her brother's car. She froze. I stepped back, heart pounding, both of us caught between confession and catastrophe. And just before the door opened, she looked at me once more, eyes wide, voice barely audible. "Don't leave," she said. The next morning, the house felt heavier, like it remembered what almost happened. Elena barely looked at me when I arrived. Her brother was home, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He smiled, said something about work, then left the room, leaving his coffee steaming between us. That silence again. Only this time, it wasn't quiet, it was charged. She stood at the counter, trying to look calm, but her hands wouldn't stay still. The sound of her bracelet tapping against the glass gave her away. "What happened last night?" she started. "Didn't happen." I stared at her. "That's one way to put it." Her eyes lifted, sharp. "You can't joke about this." "I'm not joking," I said quietly. "You told me not to leave." Her jaw tensed, and for a second, I thought she might deny it. But instead, she looked away. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" She turned suddenly, facing me, and I saw it then, the truth she'd been trying to hide. "You think you're the only one who's scared?" she said, voice low but trembling. "You don't know what it's like to be watched, to have people waiting for you to fail again. I made mistakes before, and I'm still paying for them." Her confession hit harder than I expected. "Your marriage?" I asked softly. She nodded once. "It wasn't just my husband. There was someone else before him. Someone I shouldn't have loved." The words hung there, fragile and dangerous. "So that's why," I began, but she interrupted. "That's why this can't happen again," she said. "Because I know where it leads." I stepped forward despite myself. "And yet you still look at me like that." Her breath caught. "Don't say you don't feel it," I whispered. Her hand lifted, trembling, then fell. "You shouldn't be here," she said again, but this time it sounded like a plea, not a warning. And then, a sound. The faint click of a phone screen. We both turned. Her brother was standing in the doorway, expression unreadable, holding his phone in his hand. For a second, no one spoke. He looked at Elena, then at me. "What's going on?" She froze, lips parted, eyes wide, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her. Not of being caught, but of losing something she hadn't even allowed herself to name. I opened my mouth, but she spoke first. "Nothing," she said quickly. Too quickly. He stared at her a moment longer, then muttered something about a call and walked out to the porch. The sound of the door closing was too loud. We stood there, the lie hanging between us like a third person in the room. I looked at her, at the way her hands shook, at how her breath came fast, uneven. "Elena," I said softly, "you don't have to keep pretending." Her eyes lifted, full of everything she wouldn't say, and she whispered, "Then don't make me choose." The night air was cold, but inside her living room, everything felt too close. The lights were low, shadows stretching across the floor. She stood by the window again, her favorite spot, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. I'd come to explain, to fix what her brother might have guessed, but the second she looked at me, the words vanished. "You shouldn't be here," she said, the same sentence she always used, except this time, it sounded broken. "Then tell me to leave," I said. She didn't. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. "He asked questions today. He knows something's off." "What did you tell him?" "That it was nothing." She laughed softly, bitterly. "I'm getting good at lying again." I stepped closer. "You don't have to." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make it sound simple." "It is," I said, moving another step. "You either walk away or you stop pretending you want to." She exhaled sharply, half a laugh, half a cry. "You think this is just want? Then what is it?" Her silence was the answer. I could see her trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of holding herself back. Her breathing quickened as I reached up, brushing my fingers against her cheek, tracing the faint line of exhaustion beneath her eyes. "You've spent so long being careful," I said quietly. "Don't you ever get tired?" Her eyes softened, wet at the edges, reflecting the lamp's glow. "You have no idea." I was close enough to feel her breath now, warm and uneven against my jaw. She didn't move away when I brushed a strand of hair from her face. My thumb grazed her skin, a small, reckless act that made her inhale sharply. "You're making this harder," she whispered. "I think you already decided," I said. Her hands lifted, hesitating, then found my chest. The touch was light, almost trembling. "This is wrong," she said. "I know." We stayed like that, inches apart, every breath sinking and breaking in rhythm. The air between us pulsed, too heavy to ignore. And then she leaned in, just slightly, enough for her forehead to rest against mine. "I can't promise this won't hurt," she said. "Neither can I." Her lips parted, a whisper away, not quite a kiss, not quite restraint, the impossible line we'd been circling from the beginning. For a heartbeat, time folded in on itself, all the silences, the almost, the fear, everything collapsing into one fragile, electric pause. Then she drew back, eyes steady, voice low. If we do this, there's no going back. I met her gaze, no hesitation left. Then let's stop pretending we want to. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, something in her had shifted. The distance between us disappeared. The world outside fell away. And for the first time, either of us stepped back. Morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and unhurried. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel like a place we were hiding in. It felt like somewhere that had simply paused. Elena sat on the couch, wrapped in an old cardigan, her bare feet tucked beneath her. She looked at me when I walked in, but not with that guarded distance she used to wear like armor. You came back, she said quietly. I told you I would. She smiled, small and real. You always say things like that. And then you actually mean them. I sat across from her, the air between us calm now, still charged, but in a different way. The storm had passed, leaving only what mattered. Your brother? I asked. He left early, she said. Didn't say much. Maybe he already knows, maybe he doesn't. But I can't live like every moment is something to hide. There it was, not a confession, but an acceptance. I nodded, my chest tightening in quiet relief. Neither can I. For a long while, we didn't speak. The silence was no longer heavy, it was soft. I watched the way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, absent-minded, almost shy. You know, she said after a moment, I told myself I was too old for this. Too careful. Too afraid. You're not, I said. You just forgot what it's like to be seen. Her eyes met mine, that same look from the first night, but gentler now. And you, she murmured, you make everything harder to resist. I laughed quietly. That's mutual. She reached out, slowly, resting her hand over mine. The touch was simple, warm, steady, certain. I turned my palm upward and intertwined our fingers. Neither of us flinched this time. People will talk, she said softly. Then let them, I replied. They weren't there. Her thumb brushed across my knuckles, a quiet rhythm, like reassurance. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, more to herself than to me. But it did, I said. And I'm not sorry. For a moment, her eyes glistened, not from sadness, but from something deeper, freer. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. Her breath was warm, her voice barely audible. Neither am I. The world outside carried on, cars passing, wind stirring leaves. But in that still corner of morning, it didn't matter. What we had wasn't perfect or planned. It was simply ours. No promises, no rules. Just two people who had stopped pretending not to feel. She pulled back slightly, her hand still in mine. So, she said, smiling faintly. What now? I smiled back. We start with breakfast. Her laugh, quiet, real, filled the room, and the sound alone felt like a new beginning.